Good morning, everybody, and happy Tuesday. I think we're just on time, possibly actually a couple of minutes behind. So I would say let's get started. If you guys can hear me okay, if you could just quickly confirm that would be awesome. And then we've got a few important things to go through as usual in the morning. Yeah, it sounds like we're good. Cool. All right, let's get started, folks. Again, good morning. Serge Berger here from thestudytrader.com. What we're doing here with our Set the Market morning call is we are going to spend the next 10, maybe 15 minutes or so going through the top few things on my notepad, which essentially means we are going to go through some of the more important things that we are looking at here in the markets. On the notepad this morning I want to talk about Bitcoin as it relates to MSTR, MicroStrategy. So there's something there I would like to talk about. I do want to talk about the S&P 500, the trading range, and what we could expect here in this slower Easter holiday, a shortened week, trading week. I want to talk about McDonald's, and I do want to talk about silver and silver miners, which we continue to be focusing on very closely. If you are a Inner Circle member, we are going to be doing our member session in about 15 minutes from now, and we'll go even deeper on that there. Let's start off with Bitcoin first, and this is the reason I'm bringing up Bitcoin is actually very important. I realize not everyone cares about Bitcoin, and that's totally cool. I think what everyone should understand about Bitcoin is that it really is a way to read not only liquidity but also sentiment. So what's really interesting about Bitcoin is that it's actually held up relatively better than the S&P 500. So let me quickly create a new chart here to show you this a little bit better. If I were to take just the S&P 500, and I'm going to make this a daily chart, and I'm going to take Bitcoin and divide it by SPY, what you will see is that you actually have a very constructive looking chart. In fact, if I just pointing this out, because I know a lot of people don't really look at things in relative terms, but anyone here that's ever looked at a chart, and in fact, let's make this a weekly chart to maybe accentuate this even more. Again, would love some feedback on this, but anyone that's ever looked at a chart can probably see that this is not bearish, right? In other words, what you're seeing here is you're seeing a very bullish pattern play out where ultimately you might imagine this breaking higher, this ratio, which would mean that Bitcoin would start to outperform the S&P 500, which is, I think, a reasonable case. The question is, what's the time frame? And this is really kind of where I think the rubber meets the road. When I look at Bitcoin, and I'm just going to bring back the actual chart of Bitcoin here, what I see is a chart that is largely retail heavy. Yes, there's more institutional investors, but it really represents retail sentiment. I haven't seen any panic in Bitcoin, and maybe we don't get any. But whenever we get to a point where the second phase of the cycle kicks in, and for all of you guys that have joined us in our State of the Market update, then you have heard me talk about this. We're doing the State of the Market update, I think, again today, because there's, again, so many people that couldn't get in even yesterday. We had so many people. So one thing I talk about there is that we're going to have two stages here. The first stage is essentially the shock and awe, where people are getting caught off guard. We have this weakening economy and kind of the tariff thing, which everyone is reacting to, the markets are reacting to. But the second stage, the phase 2 of this, is really a credit problem, where we're going to see defaults, we're going to see people losing their jobs, unfortunately, and this is a cycle, right? It's a secular cycle that happens. You can't stop this from happening. It always happens. I don't like it that it happens, but it does happen. And so the question is, when retail investors, a lot of people that are in Bitcoin, again, when their sentiment really goes bad in terms of them actually potentially losing a job, then you could start to see Bitcoin go down, right? And if Bitcoin goes down, then, and by the way, I should say, I'm actually very bullish Bitcoin through a multi-year lens, but I do wonder if in the near term we don't get, and I say the near term, the next few months and couple of quarters, get more drawdown. And if that happens, is it possible that what I think is one of the crazier stories I've seen in my career that now spans 25 to 26 years of investing, is it possible that MSTR, MicroStrategy, has a serious issue? Again, this comes from someone who I think Bitcoin is an interesting idea. I own some of it for diversification purposes long term. I actually think it makes a lot of sense. That's just me. You may agree, you may disagree. Moot point. My concern is the leverage that you're seeing in MicroStrategy. If people, and I'm gonna see if I can make this public. I've been doing a lot of deep diving on this over the past couple of months, and typically this kind of leverage, taking up credit to buy Bitcoin and add it to your treasury, leaves one very exposed to the price of the underlying asset, in this case, Bitcoin. I believe MSTR has an average price of Bitcoin around 67,000. And so you have to think about what that means if and when Bitcoin were to drop below, let's say, I'm going to quickly bring up the chart here of BTC, below 67,000. And stay there, maybe goes to 60,000. I don't know, right? And hypotheticals. I'm trying to be thought provocative here, right? I'm sure someone's triggered now and is typing up a nasty 2-pager to me that I'm a bearish Bitcoin. I'm not. But I would just be very concerned when you look, if you're a student of history and you look at where the biggest blowups happened, even if ultimately the story was right, they always happen at the peak of the gambling bubble. And also when some of the frauds were uncovered. And I'm not calling MSTR a fraud. That's not the point. It could be, but that's absolutely not what I'm trying to say. I'm worried about the leverage. As Buffett is keen on saying, when the tide goes out, you see who's been swimming naked. And so the leverage is something that I want to be very careful of here and be aware of. This could be a short of a lifetime if this goes right. And Bitcoin doesn't even have to fall that much. If Bitcoin goes to 50,000 or 60,000 and stays there for a while, there's a reason to believe that this could snowball. Again, I'm really not, I'm being very clear, I'm not here to try to, spew some sort of conspiracy theories or just be bearish. I'm trying to explain to people how economic cycles and business cycles and market cycles work, as most people have forgotten about how these things work. Things are cyclical and secular. And when the leverage kicks in on something like this, when the leverage backfires, that could be a problem. So if that were to happen, I'm sure everyone's wondering, Serge, how low could it go? I mean, it can go to zero, but let's just be a bit more realistic. If you want to draw some lines on this just for fun, I see no reason why this stock, I'm not even sure why it's trading where it's trading right now, although no, I do, because of the Bitcoin correlation, of course. But I mean, to me, the bigger concern for this, if you want to be technical about it, would be, again, if the stock breaks below 67,000 and Bitcoin does. And by the way, that more or less would coincide with kind of what actually nothing's long-term in this world, in this Bitcoin world, but if that long-term trend were to break below about there. So in that case, I mean, I don't see any reason why MSTR can't go, down into the 50s. That's an 80% drop from here. Not a popular Twitter post, right? You can measure how people are positioned. You can measure how people are positioned by the amount of pushback you get from trolls. So even sadly in our community of people who I think are a lot more educated about the markets, because of what we tell them about how to think about the markets, when I look at our webinars that are open to the public, guess what the number one ticker is that people still ask? MSTR. as long as you have that kind of behavior, it's very clear that the risk here, in terms of like real risk for blowing things up, is probably something like MSTR, right? Now again, it doesn't have to happen, and I'm not here to spread fear. That is not the point. What I'm trying to do is make people understand that typically at the peak of gambling bubbles, you start to see leverage get crazy, and that's kind of what's happening with MSTR. Again, this is not a personal attack on Saylor or the company. I mean, that's not the point, right? I'm just trying to show you now. Of course, people are chartists, right? Everyone's now a professional chartist, even people who've been in the markets for, just 3 years or 5 years. And they will say this is a bullish pattern. And I don't disagree. This actually is a bullish looking pattern. The problem is not every pattern works out. So this is why I always say, people, you got to do some research. You got to do more than just draw lines on charts. It's helpful. It's very helpful. I do it all day. But being able to put things into perspective in the bigger sense, the macro sense, the cyclical sense, the structural sense, and maybe even ultimately the fundamental sense helps. Because, just again, does this stock have to go up like this? It certainly could, but could it fail and just go down? Of course it can, right? Everyone was calling for breakouts, earlier this month or in January, and guess what? None of them worked. So I'm just trying to make people open-minded, because again, when we do public webinars, stuff to the open public, like this here actually, the number one ticker we still get is MSTR, and that to me is very, very telling as to where people are, how people are positioned. That's also why I believe Bitcoin is a good read to how the retail investor is positioned, less so how institutional investors are positioned. And so watch Bitcoin closely. I think if Bitcoin breaks into the below 70,000 and holds, you're going to have a bigger problem. So from an unwinding perspective, and that may be where MSTR goes. But again, hasn't happened yet. May not happen at all. Just trying to give you some risk parameters. Okay, so that's MSTR. Now let's quickly go over, just before we run out of time, let's talk about the S&P 500. Obviously, the world is still positioned in the S&P 500. So just give you a little bit of perspective there. Let me put on the simple moving averages. So just for optics, and again, the market got very, very oversold. So when the market gets as oversold as it did, and for those of you guys that have, like, for example, the Vertical X Pro, you know that we got 25 pages of extreme oversold stocks and indices, like everything, NASDAQ, QQQ, the other week, last week actually. I haven't seen that ever. It was more than COVID. So I think we're still oversold in the near term. Ultimately, I think we're going to make lower lows because the credit problem is going to come up. And again, that may be where then the MSTR thing starts to crack, but for right now, I think we're in a trading range. Now, what is the trading range? The obvious one, the simple one is that everyone sees is down here about 4,900, maybe even a bit below. And the upper end of that trading range is probably a bit higher. I think you're looking at something close to 5,700, maybe even 5,800 is the trading range. This is one hell of a trading range. You're looking at a trading range that is, literally 15% wide. I mean, that's a very, very big trading range. So that's why I'm saying I wouldn't be surprised if we get a push up to the upper end of the trading range from here, which from as we're recording is right now, that's another 5% higher. That's possible, doesn't have to, but certainly when we get to those levels, based on, unless everything's changed by then from a news perspective, I would certainly want to be a better seller. I'm currently actually still a better buyer for the very near term for trades. But again, I think once we get there, there's a few gaps I can still fill. So, there's some technical stuff there. And again, it's a holiday shortened trading week this week, certainly here in the United States, but also in Europe. And I don't know if about parts of Asia, but because of Easter on Friday. So just keep that in mind. So that's going to mean people are going to start filtering out by Thursday, maybe even before. So that's also why I think that the news flow could be a bit less. I will be surprised. I let myself be surprised. You never know, right? That's a very heavy news cycle right now. So I don't want to make that statement for sure. Obviously, I don't know. But I would say at the margin, there's a possibility that we get a bit less news. Famous last words, maybe, right? But that's kind of how I see things. All right, two more things. If you're looking for a stock that's holding up really well. Look at McDonald's. Let's just look at the chart. And if you're an Inner Circle member, we're going to talk about McDonald's there as well in just a minute on the Market Rover. But I mean, you want to talk about a stock that's holding up well. I mean, and let's doodle a little bit. Let's go and draw some of these things, and you could see that this is probably, a stock that's holding up relatively better for a reason, right? People are, the market participant is thinking, okay, this is a bit of a domestic story, although McDonald's, of course, is global, right? But the consumption is always local, right? So like for example, America doesn't export U.S. beef to China or to Europe for the McDonald's. McDonald's always, at least any McDonald's I've ever seen around the world, most of those countries have their local production for the beef and the potatoes, or at least within the continent, right? So there's not a whole lot of tariff risk here. Maybe I'm not thinking this through right, but that's some of the calls I had yesterday with a couple of guys. So that's why McDonald's probably holding up better. So that's an interesting one if you're looking for something there. And then last but not least, just quickly before we go, silver miners. I talked about silver miners yesterday. In fact, let's just do a fun exercise here that we just did with McDonald's. And in fact, let me move this, and you can see it's this. If you want to be charty about it, what you can see, it's the same exact chart that the chart pattern looks identical to McDonald's as it does to silver. Do they have anything in common? Not really. I mean, I'm sure someone can draw parallels, but you tell me. But why is the price of silver and the price of McDonald's literally the same chart, right? Conspiracy theories will have one reason. I say, hey, it is what it is. Looks bullish to me. Hope it helps. See you guys back here tomorrow. And actually, no, not tomorrow. Tomorrow, I'm traveling all day. I will be back here Thursday morning. So tomorrow morning, no set the market because I'm traveling all day. I'll be back Thursday morning quickly before we then head into the longer weekend. But we will be starting our Inner Circle member session right now with the Market Rover, and then we'll be over in Trade Ops. And then at 2 o'clock this afternoon, Eastern time, we are going to be doing another State of the Market. Very, very important. If you haven't joined yet, please join. We max out the room 2 days in a row. So that's why we have to keep doing these so everyone can actually join and watch it. We go through some very important charts. Hope this is helpful, folks. Thanks for being here. And again, no set the market tomorrow, but again on Thursday. Very important. If you do me one favor, since we're doing all this for free, please join. Hit the subscribe button on the channel. It helps you because you get alerted in real time when we go live, and it helps us to be able to continue to do the show. Otherwise, we have to shut it down at some point. And also give us a thumbs up like. That would really help us be able to continue to do the show. We're not making a penny from this. This is all free, basically goodwill. So if you could do that, that would be great. And I'll see you guys back here